He commanded an army of 300 battle-hardened soldiers. He was responsible for the recruitment of thousands of child soldiers. He was 15 years old, and in one fleeting moment, a single child's innocent hug would threaten to dismantle everything. Her bodyguard father could only watch, paralyzed with terror, as the world's most dangerous warlord simply froze. This is the story of Mohammed Humayun, a teenage commander who inherited a brutal empire in the Afghan mountains. But it's also the story of every child forced into a war they cannot understand. How could a single act of innocence fracture the psyche of a boy who had only known violence? And what happens when the most feared weapon in a warlord's arsenal is another child? His father's name was Aghagan. To the outside world, he was a ruthless warlord controlling a strategic valley. To 10-year-old Mohammed, he was a teacher. The lessons were not in mathematics or literature. They were in ballistics, tribal diplomacy, and the cold calculus of fear. This was Afghanistan in the late 1990s, a patchwork of fiefdoms ruled by men with guns, where the only inheritance that mattered was the loyalty of fighters and the location of weapon caches. Mohammed grew up in the shadow of a BM-21 multiple rocket launcher, a weapon his father had acquired from a retreating Soviet convoy years before. It was the crown jewel of their arsenal, a symbol of terror that could strike targets over 12 miles away. His playground was a network of mountain caves stocked with Kalashnikovs and rocket-propelled grenades. His bedtime stories were tales of ambushes and betrayals. By the age of 12, he could strip and reassemble an PK machine gun blindfolded. By 13, he was sitting in on meetings with hardened Mujahideen commanders, listening silently as they debated alliances with the Taliban or skirmishes with rival clans. Aghagan's philosophy was simple and brutal. Sentimentality was a weakness that got you killed. Power was maintained through a blend of generosity to your followers and utter ruthlessness to your enemies. He had seen what happened to leaders who went soft. They ended up face down in an irrigation ditch. So he meticulously sculpted his son in his own image. He made the boy witness executions, not to traumatize him, but to desensitize him. He forced him to make the first cut in the distribution of stolen grain, teaching him that leadership meant making decisions that affected hundreds of hungry families. The message was clear: you are not a child, you are a successor. But here's the thing the old warlord never counted on. You cannot erase a human being's capacity for connection, you can only bury it. And buried things have a way of surfacing at the most inconvenient times. Mohammed had a secret. In a locked metal chest under his cot, beneath manuals on mortar deployment, he kept a small, battered notebook. In it, he didn't draw tanks or maps of enemy positions. He drew birds. He drew the flowers that somehow pushed through the cracked, arid soil of their compound in the spring. He sketched the faces of the old women who worked in the kitchen, their wrinkles mapping a lifetime of survival. It was a fragile, hidden world of observation, completely at odds with the one he was being trained to command. The pressure cooker of his life was sealed tight by one overarching threat: the Taliban. They were consolidating power, and independent commanders like Aghagan were obstacles. A tenuous, distrustful truce existed, but it was made of tissue paper. Aghagan knew a final confrontation was coming. He accelerated Mohammed's education. The boy was 14 now, with the eyes of an old man. He commanded respect from the fighters, not because he was loved, but because his father's will was law, and his father's will was that they obey the boy. Then on a morning shrouded in dust, the tissue paper tore. Aghagan was traveling to a neighboring valley for what was supposed to be a peace parley. It was a trap. His convoy was hit by a Taliban rocket, attack so precise it could only have been guided by someone who knew his route. The lead vehicle, Aghagan's, was vaporized. The message was received across the region before the smoke had even cleared. The lion of the valley was dead. The kingdom was now a carcass, and every rival faction was a vulture circling down. In the main compound, chaos erupted. Veteran commanders, men twice Mohammed's age, shouted over each other in the smoke-filled meeting room. Some argued for immediate retaliation. Others whispered about surrendering to the Taliban to save their own skins. The very foundation of their small empire was cracking. Into this maelstrom walked Mohammed. He was not wearing the traditional shalwar kameez of a mourner. He was wearing his father's tactical vest, which hung loosely on his frame. He carried his father's favorite pistol, a heavy Browning high power. The room fell silent. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He looked at the most senior commander, a man named Karim with a scar running from eyebrow to chin. "How many rockets did they fire?" Mohammed asked, his voice unnervingly calm. "3," Karim answered, wary. "And how many did we intercept?" "None. The attack was a surprise." Mohammed placed the pistol on the map table with a deliberate thud. "Then our first failure was intelligence, who was responsible for the route security." A man at the back of the room shifted nervously. Before he could speak, Mohammed continued. "That failure is now secondary. The primary objective is not revenge, it is survival. If we scatter and fight among ourselves, the Taliban will pick us apart by sunset. If we stand together, we still hold the high ground, the weapons, and the loyalty of the villages that fear them more than they fear us." He was quoting his father verbatim, but the delivery was all his own, cold, logical, strategic. In that moment, the boy was gone. The commander was born. The fighters, seeing the ghost of Aghagan in his son's steel posture, fell in line. At 15 years old, Mohammed Humayun was now the unchallenged warlord of the valley. He had 300 men, 6 tanks, and that massive rocket launcher. He also had a target on his back the size of the Hindu Kush. His first order was not to attack, but to consolidate. He doubled the patrols. He moved weapon caches. He summoned the village elders and promised protection in exchange for absolute loyalty and information. He ruled with a fist even harder than his father's, believing any sign of hesitation would be fatal. He became exactly what he was trained to be, a brilliant, ruthless, tactical mind living in the body of a teenager. The outside world, when it heard of him, called him a monster, a child soldier king, a grotesque symbol of a broken country. But deep within the fortress of his own making, the isolation was absolute. He trusted no one. He ate alone, fearing poison. He slept with a pistol under his pillow, fearing a knife. The notebook of birds stayed locked away. The weight of his crown was the weight of perpetual, paralyzing suspicion. Every smile from a fighter could be a lie. Every report from a scout could be deception. He was the most powerful person in a 50-mile radius, and he was utterly, profoundly alone. This was the state of play when a new variable entered his calculated equation of control. It wasn't a Taliban assault. It wasn't a rival warlord. It was a humanitarian aid convoy, escorted by a small private security detail that had negotiated passage through his valley. They brought medicine and food, and with them, they brought a 6-year-old girl named Lena, the daughter of one of the security contractors. Her father, a former soldier named David, had brought her against all protocol because he had nowhere else safe to leave her. Their vehicle broke down just outside the main compound, and the protocol for this scenario did not exist in any of Mohammed's tactical manuals. His fighters surrounded the disabled truck, weapons raised, awaiting the order from their teenage commander. An order that would send this story careening down one of 2 irreversible paths, toward an atrocity that would cement his legend, or toward a moment of impossible humanity that could shatter it all. Mohammed raised a hand, a simple gesture, but it silenced the growl of idling engines and the nervous click of safety switches. His fighters froze. He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel, until he was 10 feet from the driver's side door. He could see the man inside, David, the father, his posture rigid, one arm held protectively across the passenger seat where the little girl sat, wide-eyed. Mohammed saw no threat in their eyes, only a desperate, calculated fear. The kind he'd seen in traders caught in crossfire, but his training screamed, "Deception is a weapon, compassion is a trap." "Out," Mohammed said, his voice flat, "all of you now." The driver, a weathered Afghan aid worker, scrambled out first, hands high, speaking rapidly in Dari about broken axles and medical supplies for the village. Mohammed ignored him. His focus was on the foreigner. David opened his door slowly, stepping out with his hands visible. He was tall, muscular, with the alert stillness of a professional. His eyes never left Mohammed, but they kept darting to the fighters' fingers on their triggers. "My daughter," David said in accented Pashto, "she is no part of this. She is just a child." "Then she should not be here," Mohammed replied in English, watching the surprise flicker in David's eyes. "This is not a place for children." The irony of his own statement, spoken by a 15-year-old warlord, hung bitterly in the air. It was then that the passenger door squeaked open. Lena stepped down, clutching a faded stuffed rabbit. She didn't look at the rifles. She looked at Mohammed. She saw a teenager, not a commander. She saw the oversized tactical vest, the tired eyes, and she did what children in safe, normal worlds do when they see someone who looks alone and burdened. She walked forward. David made a choked sound. Lena, no, stop. One of Mohammed's bodyguards shifted, raising his rifle a fraction. Mohammed shot him a look that could freeze hell, and the man lowered it instantly. A silent command had been given. She was not to be harmed. He didn't know why he gave it. It was a tactical lapse. It was dangerous. Lena stopped a foot away from him. She looked up, her head tilting. "You look sad," she said in English. The words, so blunt and true, hit Mohammed with a physical force. No one had ever said that to him. No one had dared. His fighters saw stone. His enemies saw a monster. This tiny stranger saw sadness. He had no protocol for this. His father's voice in his head was silent, replaced by a bewildering static. Before he could react, before he could order her back to the truck or dismiss her words as nonsense, she did it. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in the coarse fabric of his vest. It was not an act of petition or fear. It was an instinctive, pure gesture of comfort, a human response to perceived sadness. The entire world stopped. David stood paralyzed, every muscle coiled, expecting a blast of gunfire. The fighters stared, bewildered. Mohammed looked down at the top of her head, at the curly brown hair, and felt the rigidity in his own body. He didn't hug her back. His arms remained stiff at his sides, fingers curled into loose fists, but he didn't push her away. He didn't order her shot. For 10 full seconds, the most dangerous warlord in the valley was held captive by a 6-year-old girl. Then the spell broke. He gently, stiffly peeled her arms away and held her back at arm's length. His expression was unreadable, a mask hastily reassembled. "Take her," he said to David, his voice strangely hoarse. David rushed forward, scooping Lena into his arms, holding her tight. The relief on his face was momentary, quickly replaced by renewed dread. What came next? Mohammed turned to his head of security, Karim. "Bring them inside. The convoy can fix their truck and leave. These two stay." "Commander," Karim asked, confused. Hostages were bargaining chips, but this made no sense. They were worthless. The aid group had no money. "Just do it," Mohammed snapped, the familiar ice returning to his voice. He walked back toward the main compound building, his stride hurried, as if fleeing the scene of a crime. Inside the bare, cold room that served as his office and sleeping quarters, the walls seemed to press in on him. He could still feel the ghostly pressure of those small arms around him. It had sparked a memory, buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. His mother, hugging him before she died of fever when he was 5. The warmth, the safety, the smell of rosewater. A wave of nausea hit him. He had spent a decade building fortresses in his mind, and a child had found a secret door in 5 seconds. He made a decision, not from strategy, but from a desperate need to understand the breach in his own defenses. He summoned David, alone. David entered, his posture still tense, but now layered with confusion. "What do you want?" he asked. "Sit," Mohammed said, gesturing to a wooden stool. He remained standing, a power play, but it felt hollow. "The girl, why did she do that?" David studied him, the professional assessing a threat. "She's 6. She has empathy. She sees someone upset, she tries to fix it. It's what children do." "It is a weakness," Mohammed stated, but it sounded like a question. "Where I come from, it's a strength," David countered carefully. "But here, I understand it can be seen differently. We mean no threat, we just want to leave." "You will," Mohammed said, "but first, you will tell me about this empathy. How is it not a liability? How does it not get you killed?" And so began the most surreal interrogation in the history of the valley. The teenage warlord, a product of absolute realpolitik, grilled a former soldier on the mechanics of human connection, trust, and emotional resilience. David, sensing his survival and his daughter's depended on this bizarre conversation, spoke carefully. He talked about unit cohesion in the military, how trust between soldiers, was a force multiplier. He talked about reading intentions in micro-expressions, a skill more nuanced than simple suspicion. He explained that constant, paralyzing fear was as damaging as complacency. Mohammed listened with the intensity of a scholar. He was deconstructing a foreign philosophy of power. For days, this continued. Lena was kept in an adjacent room, cared for by the cook's wife. Mohammed would sometimes watch her from a distance as she drew pictures in the dust with a stick. She drew a big, lopsided house with a smiling sun. She drew a figure that looked like a man with a big vest. She was not afraid. The rumor among the fighters, however, was a virus of doubt. Their commander, the Iron Boy, had been softened by a child. He was spending hours talking to the foreigner about feelings. Was he losing his edge? The Taliban had killed his father for weakness. Was he next? And if he was weak, were they all doomed? Karim, the loyal but pragmatic head of security, felt the unease spreading. He began to make contingency plans. The pivot came 1 week into this strange stalemate. A Taliban messenger under a white flag arrived at the outer gate. The message was for Mohammed alone. It was a single piece of paper in a sealed envelope. Mohammed read it in his office, his face turning to stone. The message was succinct. It acknowledged the incident with the foreign child. It called Mohammed's hesitation, his failure to immediately seize the conv or execute the intruders, a sign of emotional corruption. It gave him an ultimatum: prove his commitment to the harsh realities of their struggle, execute the foreign man and the child publicly, and send the heads as proof. Do this within 48 hours, and they would consider his rule legitimate. Refuse, and they would wipe his entire compound off the map, viewing him as an unstable puppet of Western sentiment. The trap was perfect. It weaponized the very moment of humanity Lena had sparked. If he killed them, he would cement his brutality, but also murder the only 2 people who had looked at him as something other than a weapon in months. He would fully become the monster he was pretending to be. If he spared them, he would be declaring war not just on the Taliban, but on the fundamental law of his own world, that mercy is suicide. He called David into the office and showed him the note. David read it, the color draining from his face. "So that's it," he said, his voice quiet. "You'll do it to save your men, your position." Mohammed didn't answer. He was staring out the small, barred window at the mountains. "My father," he said slowly, "once told me that a true leader knows when to sacrifice one to save 100. It is simple mathematics." "She's not a number," David whispered, fury and despair mixing. "She's Lena." "I know her name," Mohammed shouted suddenly, slamming his fist on the table. The outburst shocked them both. He took a breath, regaining control. "I know her name, and that is the problem." That night, Mohammed didn't sleep. He sat on the floor of his room and unlocked the metal chest. He took out the notebook of birds and flowers. He flipped to a blank page, and for the first time he didn't draw from memory. He drew from life. He sketched the little girl Lena holding her rabbit. He drew her not as a symbol, but as a person. As he drew, the walls he'd built around his childhood, around that lost boy who liked to draw, began to fracture. The 2 selves, the commander and the child, were at war, and the battlefield was his soul. In the morning, his decision was made, but it was not the decision anyone expected. He summoned Karim and his top 3 commanders. "We are not killing the hostages," he stated flatly. The room erupted. Karim argued first. "Commander, this is insanity. The Taliban will attack with everything they have. They outnumber us 3 to 1. "Then we will not be here when they arrive," Mohammed said, a terrifying calm in his eyes. He unrolled a map. "We abandon the compound." Stunned silence. Abandon the fortress his father built, the symbol of their power. It was unthinkable. "We take the heavy weapons we can move. We cache the rest in the new locations I have scouted here, and here," he pointed to remote caves. "We disperse the fighters into the villages to hide among the people. We become ghosts. The Taliban will attack an empty hole, and when they are frustrated, when they let their guard down thinking we are broken, we strike from the shadows, a new kind of war." It was a breathtaking, radical tactical shift. It was also a confession. He could not kill the girl, so he was choosing to sacrifice his home, his seat of power instead. He was risking mutiny to avoid an atrocity. The commanders looked at each other. This was not the Iron Boy. This was something else, something unpredictable. and in their world, unpredictable was dangerous. Karim nodded slowly, the last to agree, "As you command," but his eyes held a dark calculation. As the meeting broke up, Mohammed saw Karim linger, speaking in low tones with one of the other commanders. A seed of suspicion, older than Lena's hug, took root in Mohammed's mind. His father's first lesson: trust no one. The order was given. The compound erupted in controlled chaos, weapons being hidden, vehicles prepared, families told to flee to relatives. David and Lena were to be moved with Mohammed's personal group. As Mohammed supervised the loading of communication equipment, Lena approached him, holding out her latest dust drawing, now smudged on a piece of torn paper. It showed two stick figures holding hands. One was small, one was tall and wearing a square vest. "This is you and me," she said, "being friends." Mohammed took the paper. He looked from the crude drawing to her hopeful face, to the distant mountains where his enemies were massing, to the faces of his fighters who now watched this interaction with inscrutable eyes. He had just gambled everything on a refusal to kill this child. And in this moment, he realized with chilling clarity that the greatest threat was no longer outside the walls. It was inside. The real war for his soul had just begun, and the first shots were about to be fired not by the Taliban, but by his own men. The first shot, when it came, was not from the mountains. It came from inside the motor pool. Mohammed was helping load a crate of ammunition into a truck when a sharp crack split the air. He spun, his hand going to his pistol. A fighter named Rafi, one of the men loading the BM-21 rocket launcher onto a heavy transporter, slumped forward, a red bloom spreading across his back. Standing behind him, pistol smoking, was Commander Karim. He wasn't looking at the dead man. He was looking straight at Mohammed. "The evacuation is over," Karim announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent courtyard. A dozen fighters, those Karim had secretly swayed, moved with practiced speed. They fanned out, taking up positions with clear lines of fire, not at the gates, but at the other loyalist fighters. In an instant, the compound's defenses were turned inward. Mohammed stood exposed in the open yard. He didn't draw his weapon. It would be suicide. "Karim," he said, his voice deceptively calm, "this is mutiny." "This is a correction," Karim replied, stepping over Rafi's body. "You are surrendering our home, our strength, for a foreign child. Your father's ghost weeps. You have lost the will to lead." David, who had been securing Lena in a parked jeep, saw the standoff. His soldier's instinct screamed to grab a weapon, but he was unarmed, surrounded by armed men in a factional dispute he didn't understand. He pushed Lena down below the dashboard. "Don't look, sweetheart, just stay down." Mohammed calculated the angles. He was 20 feet from Karim, with 3 mutineers between them. His loyal fighters were scattered, outnumbered, and caught by surprise. To fight was to die, and ensure David and Lena were slaughtered. He needed time. He needed to understand the scope of the betrayal. "You think the Taliban will reward you for delivering my head?" Mohammed asked, taking a slow step forward. "They will slaughter you next. You know their word is worthless." "I am not giving you to the Taliban," Karim said, a cruel smile touching his lips. "I am giving you to them." He jerked his head toward the main gate. On cue, the heavy gates groaned open, not to a Taliban force, but to a convoy of Toyota Technicals flying the banner of a rival warlord from the next valley, Gulbuddin, a man who had been Aghagan's bitter enemy for a decade. This was not a Taliban play. This was a traditional, old-fashioned power grab, fueled by the perception of Mohammed's weakness. The revelation hit Mohammed like a physical blow. Karim hadn't just been discontent, he had been negotiating with his father's oldest enemy. The betrayal was deeper, more personal. It meant Karim had likely been compromised for a long time. The Taliban ultimatum had just been the spark. The tinder was already laid by Gulbuddin's promises. Gulbuddin himself, a bear of a man with a thick black beard, strode through the gate, flanked by his own elite guards. He ignored the tense standoff and walked right up to Mohammed, looking him up and down with disdain. "The boy chief," he grunted. "Your father was a lion. You are a kitten playing dress-up." Mohammed said nothing. His mind was racing, re-evaluating every interaction with Karim over the past year. The missed patrol reports, the underestimated enemy numbers, his father's ambush. A sickening picture began to form. Gulbadin turned to Karim. "You have done well. The valley is mine. The boy is mine. The weapons are mine." He then gestured toward the jeep where David and Lena were hidden. "And the foreigners, a bonus. We can sell them back or use them for propaganda." Karim nodded, but his eyes flickered with something, not remorse, but a sharp, sudden anxiety. He hadn't accounted for Gulbadin's immediate and total claim of everything. He had hoped for a partnership, not subjugation. Mohammed saw the flicker. It was the crack in the wall. He spoke loudly so all the mutineers could hear. "You see, Karim, you traded my father's throne for a place as Gulbadin's dog, and a dog that bites its first master will never be fed by the second." Gulbadin laughed. "He has a tongue, this one. We will cut it out later." He motioned to his guards. "Take him, secure the weapons cache lists from him, use whatever methods you need." As Gulbadin's guards moved forward, Mohammed made his play. He didn't resist. Instead, he looked past Gulbadin, directly at the cluster of his own fighters who had followed Karim. "Men of the valley," he shouted. "My father's men, do you really want to serve the butcher who helped kill him?" The courtyard froze. Karim's face went pale. "Lies." "Is it?" Mohammed fired back, his voice ringing with a conviction he didn't fully have, but was betting everything on. "Who was en route security the day my father died? Karim? You, who told him the path was clear? You, who met with Gulbadin's messengers 3 times in the month before the attack? I have the dates. I have the witnesses you thought were silent." It was a bluff. He had suspicions, no proof, but the sheer, specific accusation landed like a mortar shell. The loyalist fighters, who had been confused and leaderless, now stared at Karim with dawning horror. The mutineers shifted uneasily. Betraying a weak leader was one thing. Conspiring in the murder of the legendary Aghagan was a stain that would get them killed by their own families. Gulbadin, seeing the mood shift, lost patience. "Enough, take him now." In the chaos of that moment, as Gulbadin's guards lunged, David made his move. He wasn't a fighter here, but he was an observer, and he'd been watching one particular weapon, a PK machine gun on a tripod mount near the gate, left unattended in the confusion. With a surge of desperate strength, he shoved the jeep door open, sprinted 5 paces, and dove behind the heavy weapon. He may not have known the tribal politics, but he knew how to chamber a round and traverse a fire arc. The roar of the PK machine gun was deafening. David didn't aim at men. He aimed at the engine blocks of Gulbadin's lead technicals, stitching a line of fire that turned them into instant scrap metal, blocking the gateway. It was a diversion, not an attack, a wall of noise and smoke and confusion. That was all Mohammed needed. As Gulbadin's guards ducked, he exploded into motion. He barreled into the nearest one, driving the man's head into the side of the ammunition truck, grabbing his AK-47 as he fell. He didn't join the firefight. He ran toward the jeep. His goal wasn't to win the battle. It was to extract the catalyst of this whole disaster. He reached the jeep as David, out of ammunition, abandoned the machine gun and ran back. "Get in," Mohammed yelled, sliding into the driver's seat. David jumped into the passenger side, pulling Lena up from the footwell. Mohammed slammed the jeep into gear and stomped on the accelerator. The vehicle lurched forward, not toward the blocked main gate, but toward a small, fortified side gate used for trash disposal. "That gate is locked," David shouted. "I know," Mohammed yelled back. He drove straight at it. At the last second, he wrenched the wheel and pulled the handbrake, spinning the jeep sideways so the passenger side slammed into the heavy wooden gate. The impact was jarring, splintering the old wood but not breaking it. "Shoot the lock," Mohammed ordered. David, understanding, leaned out the window with the captured AK-47 and fired a burst at the ancient iron lock mechanism. It shattered. Mohammed reversed, then rammed the gate again with the front bumper. This time, it burst open into a narrow alley. Behind them, the compound erupted into full-scale civil war. The lines were no longer clear. Loyalists, mutineers, and Gulbadin's men were all shooting. The original plan dissolved into chaos. Karim was screaming orders no one was listening to. Gulbadin was firing his pistol at anyone who moved. The jeep careened down the alley and onto a rugged mountain track. They were free, but they were now the most wanted targets in a 3-sided conflict. They had no supplies, little fuel, and a 6-year-old girl in the back seat. They drove in silence for an hour, putting rough terrain between them and the distant sound of gunfire. Finally, Mohammed pulled over in a rocky gully hidden from the path. He killed the engine. The silence was immense. David looked at him. What now? They'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. Mohammed stared at his hands on the steering wheel. They were trembling, not from fear, but from the seismic collapse of his entire world. His home was gone. His army was shattered or turned against him. His father's legacy was ashes, and it was all because he couldn't pull a trigger on an innocent. He looked back at Lena. She was clutching her rabbit, her eyes huge, but she wasn't crying. She was watching him. "You're bleeding," she said softly. He touched his temple. A piece of flying debris had cut him during the escape. A trickle of blood ran down his cheek. It was nothing, but her saying it made it real. He was wounded. He was vulnerable. He had nothing left. Then, from the abyss of that realization, a cold, clear thought emerged. It was the thought that would change everything. He turned to David. "You said empathy was a strength. That trust is a force multiplier." "In my world, yes," David said cautiously. "Then we are not in my world anymore," Mohammed stated, "and we are not in yours." He opened the jeep door and stepped out, looking at the vast, unforgiving mountains. "My father's way is dead. Karim and Gulbuddin's way is a cycle of betrayal that ends in everyone's grave." He looked back at Lena, then at David. "So we make a new way." David got out of the jeep. "How? You have no men, no base." "I have my name," Mohammed said, "and I have the truth about Karim, and you have a reason to fight that is bigger than land or money." He gestured to Lena. "We go to the villages, not as a warlord demanding loyalty, but as someone telling a story. The story of a commander who chose a child over his crown and the traitor who sold out his own to a rival. We show them the choice." David shook his head. "They'll see it as weakness. They'll turn you in for a reward." "Maybe," Mohammed admitted, "but the villages hate Gulbuddin. He taxes them into starvation. They feared my father, but they respected him because he was their monster. Gulbuddin is a foreign predator, and Karim," he let the name hang, "Karim betrayed a son of this valley. That is a blood feud any elder will understand." It was a desperate, insane plan, to build a new army not on fear, but on narrative, on shared outrage and a sliver of perceived honor. He was gambling that the humanity Lena had exposed in him could be weaponized into a different kind of loyalty. He reached into his vest and pulled out the folded, smudged drawing Lena had given him, the two stick figures holding hands. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Lena. "Can you draw me another picture?" he asked, his voice quieter than David had ever heard it, "of a man helping a village." Lena nodded slowly. "Good," Mohammed said. He looked at David. "We start with one village, one story. We see if a different kind of weapon can win a war." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the gully, the three of them, a deposed teenage warlord, a former soldier, and a little girl, stood at the edge of an impossible precipice. Behind them was the world of bullets and betrayal that had defined everything. Ahead was a path with no map. Mohammed had just chosen to fight the most dangerous war of all, a war for the truth, and the first battle would be fought not with rockets, but with a child's drawing. The real question was, would anyone listen before the old world's vengeance found them? The first village was called Olma. It was a cluster of mud brick houses clinging to the side of a cliff, poor, forgotten, and deeply suspicious. News traveled fast in the mountains. They already knew the Morty compound had fallen. They expected either Gulbuddin's tax collectors or a band of desperate, looting fugitives. What arrived was a jeep with a teenage boy in a torn tactical vest, a foreigner, and a little girl. Mohammed ordered David to wait at the edge of the village with Lena and the jeep running. He walked in alone, unarmed, his hands visible. The village elders met him in the dusty central square, their faces carved from the same stone as the mountains. They did not invite him to sit. They did not offer tea. "You have brought war to our door," said the eldest, a man named Habib with milky eyes. "Gulbuddin will burn us for sheltering you." "I am not asking for shelter," Mohammed replied, his voice respectful but firm. "I am asking for your ears, for 5 minutes. Then we will leave." Habib studied him. "Speak." Mohammed did not speak of strategy or weapons. He told a story. He spoke of his father, Aghagan, and the old respect, however fear-based, that existed between the commander and the people. He spoke of the trap, the rocket, and his own sudden inheritance of a crown he never wanted. And then he told them about Karim. He detailed the betrayal, the secret meetings with Gulbuddin, the strong possibility that Karim had engineered Aghagan's death. He gave names, dates, routes. The specificity was damning. "Why tell us this?" another elder asked. "To recruit us to die for you?" "No," Mohammed said. He finally looked tired, his teenage frame slumping slightly. "Gulbuddin will come. He will take your grain, your sons, your dignity. He always has. I am telling you this so you know the man who now rules you is a snake who bites his own, and the man who serves him, Karim, is a traitor to this very soil. When they come, you will know what they are. That is all." He turned to leave. He had gambled and, it seemed, lost. The elders would likely send a runner to Gulbuddin to collect a reward. "Wait!" The voice was Habib's. The old man stood slowly, using a stick for support. "The child, the foreign girl, is she the one from the story, the one you did not kill?" Mohammed paused, then nodded. "And the foreigner with you, he fought for you in your courtyard." "He fought for his daughter," Mohammed corrected. A murmur went through the elders. This was not the calculus of power they understood. It was something else. A foreigner fighting not for money, but for family. A warlord sparing a life at the cost of his kingdom. In a culture where honor and blood feuds were the very fabric of society, these acts were not weak. They were incomprehensible and therefore powerful. "You may stay the night," Habib declared. "One night, in the old shepherd's hut on the ridge. If you are gone by dawn, we saw nothing." It was not an army, it was not loyalty, it was a sliver of curiosity. It was enough. That night in the cold, bare hut, Lena presented her new drawing to Mohammed. It showed a big house with many small houses around it and a sun with a smile. "This is the village being happy," she explained. Mohammed took it. "Thank you." David watched the interaction. "What's the real plan, Mohammed? One village giving us a night's grace isn't a movement." "The plan is the truth," Mohammed said, staring at the drawing. "Karim's betrayal is a poison in the well. We just have to make sure everyone drinks from it before Gulbuddin can cement his rule." They visited 3 more villages in as many days. Each time the pattern repeated: suspicion, the story, the details of Karim's treachery, the mention of the child. And each time the result was the same, not commitment, but a hesitant, temporary sanctuary, a place to sleep, a little bread, information. They learned that Gulbuddin was struggling to consolidate power. The captured compound was a prize, but Mohamed's loyalists had fled into the hills with a significant portion of the weapon caches, following a prearranged dispersal plan. Gulbuddin was furious, and his rage was directed at Karim, who had promised him a seamless transition. The crack between the 2 usurpers was widening, and Mohamed's story was the wedge. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: the family of the fighter Rafi, the man Karim had shot in the motor pool. Rafi's brother, a quiet man named Talib, tracked Mohamed's small group to a valley north of Olma. He came alone, armed, but with his rifle slung across his back. He sought not revenge, but confirmation. "My brother was a loyal man," Talib said, his eyes hard. "Karim killed him like a dog. Is it true? Did he sell Aghagan to Gulbuddin?" Mohammed met his gaze. "I believe he did. I have no proof you can hold. Only the timing, the lies, and the fact he now stands at Gulbuddin's right hand." Talib spat on the ground. "That is proof enough for me. My brother's blood is proof enough. I know others, men who are hiding, who are ashamed they followed Karim's lies. They will listen to me." This was the force multiplier David had spoken of. Not empathy, but righteous anger channeled through a credible messenger. Talib became Mohamed's first recruit, and he brought 5 others within 2 days. They were no longer just storytellers. They were a nucleus, a tiny, mobile guerrilla force. They used the village network for supplies and intelligence. They avoided direct confrontation, instead raiding Gulbuddin's supply lines, always leaving behind not destruction, but a message. "From the son of Aghagan, Ask Karim why your commander really died. The psychological campaign was working. Gulbuddin, paranoid and angry, began to openly distrust Karim. He withheld promised positions. He assigned him the most dangerous, thankless tasks. The alliance was rotting from the inside. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening to Mohammed. The more he relied on the villages, the more he had to listen. He heard about water disputes, about stolen goats, about marriages and harvests. He began to arbitrate not with threats, but with judgments aimed at fairness. He was becoming, to his own shock, a leader of people, not just of fighters. The notebook in his vest now contained not just birds, but maps of water sources and lists of family grievances. The final confrontation was triggered by Gulbuddin's own brutality. Frustrated by the guerrilla raids and the spreading rumors, he ordered a punitive raid on Olma, the first village that had given Mohammed shelter. His men were to make an example. The news reached Mohammed just in time. He had 20 men now. Gulbuddin was sending 30. The math was terrible, but for the first time, he wasn't just defending territory. He was defending a promise. The battle for Olma was not a set-piece war. It was an ambush in the narrow pass leading to the village. Mohammed's men, using knowledge of the terrain and weapons from their hidden caches, attacked with swift, sharp ferocity. David fought beside them, his military training providing crucial discipline, but the turning point came from the village itself. The men of Olma, seeing Gulbuddin's forces actually arriving to burn their homes, did not hide. They picked up old hunting rifles, axes, and shovels. They joined the fight. They were not fighting for Mohammed the Warlord. They were fighting against Gulbuddin the Predator, and that was enough. In the chaos, Mohammed saw Karim across the battlefield, trying to rally Gulbuddin's faltering men. Their eyes met. Without a word, Mohammed broke from his position and moved toward him. This was not tactical. This was personal. They met in a clearing strewn with rocks. Karim raised his rifle. Mohammed had only his pistol. "It ends here, boy," Karim snarled. "It ended the day you betrayed my father," Mohammed said, his voice cold. "I just didn't know it yet." Karim fired. The shot went wide, kicking up dirt. Mohammed didn't flinch. He didn't shoot back. He started walking toward him. "Stay back," Karim screamed, firing again. Another miss. The pressure, the guilt, the collapsing world around him was destroying his aim. Mohammed kept walking, 10 feet, 5. With a roar of desperation, Karim charged, swinging his rifle like a club. Mohammed ducked under the swing and drove his shoulder into Karim's chest, knocking him to the ground. They grappled in the dust. Karim was stronger, but Mohammed was fueled by a pure, focused rage. He wrestled the rifle away and pinned Karim, his knee on the man's chest. He could have killed him. He should have. Every rule of his world demanded it. He looked at the face of the man who had murdered his father, stolen his home, and tried to kill him. He raised the rifle butt for a crushing blow. And then he heard a small, clear voice from the edge of the clearing. "Mohammed." It was Lena. David was holding her back, but she had seen. She wasn't crying, she was just watching. Mohammed froze. The rifle butt hovered in the air. He looked from Karim's terrified face to Lena's expectant one. In that split second, he saw two futures. One where he finished his father's war in the old way, with blood and vengeance, and another, uncertain path where he broke the cycle. He lowered the rifle. He stood up, breathing heavily. "Get up," he said to Karim. Karim scrambled to his feet, confused, expecting death. "You will walk back to Gulbuddin," Mohammed commanded, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet battlefield. The fighting around them had stopped, everyone watching. "You will tell him you failed. You will tell him the son of Aghagan let you live. And you will tell him that every man who leaves his side and lays down his arms will also live. The war for this valley is over, but the choice is theirs." It was the ultimate psychological move. Sparing the architect of his ruin was a display of power so absolute it was terrifying. It humiliated Gulbuddin completely, and it offered his fighters a clean way out. Karim stumbled away, broken not in body but in spirit. The news spread through Gulbuddin's ranks like wildfire. Within hours, men began to desert, slipping away into the mountains. Gulbuddin, isolated and shamed, gathered his remaining loyalists and retreated from the valley that night. He knew he could not hold it. The The myth of Mohammed Humayun had been rewritten. He was no longer the Iron Boy. He was something new, the commander who could have taken vengeance but chose mercy. In the weeks that followed, Mohammed did not reclaim his father's fortress. He let it stand empty, a monument to the old ways. He based himself in Ulma, ruling through the Council of Elders. The loyalist fighters returned, and the valley knew a fragile, tense peace. David and Lena stayed longer than anyone expected, helping to establish basic medical care with the aid convoys recovered supplies. The final, surprising detail came on the day they were finally leaving. A UN-chartered helicopter was arriving to extract them. Lena ran up to Mohammed and hugged him, this time without hesitation. He still stiffened, but after a moment, one hand came to rest gently on her head. David shook his hand. "You built something different here, don't let them tell you it was weak." Mohammed nodded. "It is weaker, every day is a choice, it is harder than fear." As the helicopter lifted off, David looked down. He saw Mohammed, standing alone, watching them go. Then he saw the warlord turn and walk back toward the village elders waiting for him. He was not a king returning to a castle. He was a young man walking toward an endless, difficult meeting about irrigation. The most dangerous weapon he had deployed was not the BM-21 rocket launcher. It was a refusal to become what the world expected him to be. The valley's peace would be tested, as all peaces are. But the story of the warlord and the child's hug had already become legend. It proved that in the calculus of power, there is one variable no strategist can ever fully account for: the unpredictable, disarming power of a single human moment. And sometimes, that is enough to change everything. So what does the story of the boy warlord and the hug really tell us? It tells us that the most fortified prison is often the one we build for ourselves. Mohammed Humayun was conditioned to believe that any crack in his armor was a fatal flaw, that mercy was a tactical error, that to be loved was to be vulnerable, and to be vulnerable was to die. The entire ecosystem of violence around him was built to reinforce that idea. Yet, in the span of a few seconds, a child's instinctive gesture proved that armor could also be a cage. And that the key to the lock wasn't more strength, but a moment of acknowledged weakness. His story is a stark reminder that the narratives we assign to people, monster, warlord, villain, are often just the outermost layer. Beneath that is a history, a trauma, a series of choices made in impossible circumstances. This isn't to excuse atrocity, but to understand its mechanics. The international organizations that track child soldiers report that breaking the cycle of violence requires one critical, fragile ingredient: reintegration. Not just disarming a fighter, but reconnecting a human being to their own stifled empathy. Mohammed's journey was a violent, accelerated version of that process. Lena didn't disarm a warlord. She simply ignored the title and spoke to the person. And in doing so, she created a paradox he couldn't resolve. How could something that felt so human be a strategic liability? The aftermath, the loss of his fortress, the mutiny, the guerrilla war was the price of that paradox. But the peace he forged, however tentative, was its dividend. He didn't win by becoming more ruthless than his enemies. He won by becoming something they couldn't comprehend. In the economy of fear, he introduced a currency they couldn't counterfeit. When he spared Karim, he didn't just show mercy. He demonstrated a sovereignty so complete he could afford it. It was the ultimate power move, disguised as forgiveness. But here is the lingering question the story leaves us with. Was this a transformation or simply a revelation? Did the hug create a new man, or did it just strip away the performance, revealing the boy who drew birds in a notebook all along? Perhaps the most terrifying and hopeful answer is both. It suggests that within even the most hardened shells, a kernel of a different self remains, dormant, waiting not for a battle to awaken it, but for a moment of unexpected humanity. Mohammed's valley is still there. The peace is fragile. Gulbuddin may regroup. New enemies may emerge. The daily choice between the easy ruthlessness of his father and the difficult empathy of his new path will never end. But a precedent has been set. A story is now told in the villages. It is no longer just a story about a warlord. It is a story about a boy who was given a choice between a crown and a conscience, and who, against every ounce of his training, chose his conscience. And in that choice, he found a different kind of power. What do you think? Was Mohammed's mercy a brilliant strategy, or a dangerous naivety that will eventually get him killed? Could such a moment ever truly disarm the cycles of violence in our own world, Or is it just a compelling fiction? Let me know your perspective in the comments below. If this story of transformation and impossible choices resonated with you, please hit the like button. It truly helps this channel reach more people. Share this with someone who believes in the power of human connection, even in the darkest of places. And subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that challenge what we think we know about power, fear, and the small, quiet moments that change everything. Thanks for watching.